Most grandparents are ruining their relationships with their grandchildren by trying too hard to be memorable. That's the paradox I discovered after 40 years of clinical practice and raising 3 generations in my own family. You're probably doing exactly what damages long-term bonding without realizing it. Here's what nobody tells you. The grandmother who plans elaborate Disney trips and spends thousands on gifts often becomes a distant memory faster than the grandfather who simply taught his grandson to fold paper airplanes every Tuesday afternoon. The neuroscience behind this is crystal clear, and I'm going to share research that will completely change how you approach your time with your grandchildren. Let me establish something important right away. I spent 4 decades as a clinical psychologist specializing in family dynamics and intergenerational relationships. I've counseled over 2,000 families, and I've seen patterns emerge that most people miss entirely. More importantly, I've made devastating mistakes with my own grandchildren that I had to correct, and those corrections led to breakthroughs I now share with you. The human brain, specifically the hippocampus which processes memories, responds dramatically differently to predictable, repeated experiences versus one-time spectacular events. A study from the University of California, published in 2019, examined memory formation in children aged 4 to 12. Researchers found that children retained emotional memories of repeated small interactions at a rate of 73% after 5 years, while retention of singular large events dropped to 28% in the same time frame. What this means for you is profound and will save you both money and heartache. Your brain and your grandchild's brain create memories through a process involving neurons, synapses, and neurotransmitters, particularly dopamine and oxytocin. When you share a repeated experience, you're not just creating one memory. You're building a neural pathway that strengthens with each repetition. Think of it like this. Every Tuesday when you teach your granddaughter to bake cookies, you're literally constructing a superhighway in her brain that connects you to feelings of safety, love, and belonging. That single expensive trip to an amusement park, that's a dirt road that gets overgrown quickly. The problem most grandparents face is time scarcity combined with guilt. You see your grandchildren infrequently, maybe once a month or less, so you try to compensate by making each visit extraordinary. You're exhausting yourself, planning activities, spending money you may not have, and creating anxiety for everyone involved. Meanwhile, the grandmother down the street who has her grandson over every Saturday morning to help water plants and feed birds is building an unshakable bond that will last his entire lifetime. I'm going to reveal the 5 specific strategies I developed that transformed my relationships with my 7 grandchildren. But first, you need to understand what's happening chemically in those little brains when you interact with them. This matters because once you understand the mechanism, you'll never waste time on empty experiences again. When a child experiences something novel and exciting, their brain releases dopamine. Dopamine feels good. It's the reward chemical. But dopamine alone doesn't create lasting memories. You need oxytocin, the bonding hormone, which releases during calm, repeated, secure interactions. An amusement park triggers massive dopamine but minimal oxytocin. Sitting together reading the same book, every visit triggers moderate dopamine but floods the system with oxytocin. Which do you want? The prefrontal cortex in children, the part responsible for decision-making and memory consolidation, doesn't fully develop until the mid-20s. In young children, this area is remarkably underdeveloped. What this means practically is that children under 8 don't process complex experiences the way adults do. They can't appreciate the effort you put into planning that elaborate birthday party, but they absolutely remember the feeling of sitting in your lap while you taught them to shuffle cards. Let me tell you about my grandson Marcus. When he was 5, I took him to a professional baseball game. Premium seats, all the snacks he wanted, souvenirs, the works, cost me over $300. 6 months later, I asked him about his favorite memory with me. He said it was the time we laid on the grass in my backyard counting clouds, and I taught him the names of different cloud formations. Total cost, $0. Time invested, 45 minutes. But we had done it 6 different times over that summer. Now here's what I'm going to show you today, and I want you to pay close attention because this is the framework that will revolutionize your grandparenting. I'm going to give you 5 specific categories of memory-building activities that maximize neurological bonding while minimizing stress and expense. I'm going to explain exactly why each one works at the brain chemistry level, and I'm going to share the mistakes that will sabotage everything even even when you think you're doing it right. But before I get into those 5 categories, let me tell you what happened when I ignored my own training and made a critical error with my granddaughter Sophie. She was 7, and I wanted to impress her. I planned an entire weekend, every hour scheduled with activities I thought she'd love: a museum, a puppet show, lunch at a fancy restaurant, shopping for a special dress, then dinner and a movie. By hour 4, she was melting down. By hour 6, she was crying and asking for her mother. I had triggered stress hormones, cortisol specifically, which actively interferes with memory formation and bonding. I spent an entire weekend and $500 creating a negative association with spending time with me. The amygdala, your brain's emotional processing center, responds to stress by flooding the system with cortisol. Cortisol shuts down the hippocampus. This is a survival mechanism. When you're in danger, your brain doesn't want you making complex memories. It wants you focused on survival. When you overstimulate a child with too much novelty, too much activity, or too much disruption to their routine, you activate their stress response. You're literally preventing memory formation while exhausting yourself trying to create memories. After that disaster with Sophie, I completely changed my approach. The next time she visited, I asked her what she wanted to do. She said she wanted to play with my old typewriter she'd seen in my office. We spent 3 hours just typing random words and making up silly stories. She laughed so hard she got hiccups. 2 years later, she still talks about the typewriter adventures, and she's asked to do it every single visit since then. Total cost, 0. Stress level, 0. Memory formation, maximum. What's your biggest struggle with making time with your grandchildren feel special? Drop a comment and let me know where you're located and what challenges you're facing. I read every comment and often create follow-up content based on what you tell me. Now let me explain the 5 categories, and I promise you that by the end of this video, you'll have a complete framework for creating memories that your grandchildren will carry for their entire lives. Category 1 is what I call ritual building. This is the most powerful memory-creating tool in your arsenal, and it's based on solid neuroscience. Rituals create what researchers call temporal landmarks in a child's brain. A study from Northwestern University in 2021 examined the long-term memory formation in adults about their childhood, and they found that regular rituals with grandparents ranked as the #1 predictor of strong emotional bonds lasting into adulthood. Here's how ritual building works at the neurological level. When you establish a predictable activity that happens the same way each time, you're building what neuroscientists call a memory schema. This is essentially a template in the brain. Once the schema is established, each new experience fitting that template gets filed into long-term memory much more efficiently. Think of it like this. The first time you teach your grandchild to make pancakes with you is creating a new folder in their brain. Every subsequent pancake morning just adds a file to that folder, and the entire folder becomes a permanent part of their identity. The key to effective ritual building is consistency in timing and structure. It doesn't matter if you see your grandchildren once a week or once a month. What matters is that when you do see them, certain things are predictable. Maybe every visit starts with hot chocolate and a specific question you ask them. Maybe every goodbye includes a secret handshake you created together. Maybe every summer visit includes fishing at the same pond. The specifics don't matter, the repetition does. I established a ritual with my grandson called Tool Tuesday. Every Tuesday afternoon, I taught him how to use one tool from my garage. We started when he was 6 with a measuring tape. By the time he was 10, he could use a drill press safely. Now he's 14 and he's building furniture in my workshop. But here's what matters. He doesn't remember individual Tuesdays particularly well. He remembers Tool Tuesday as a singular, powerful experience that defines our relationship. His brain has consolidated hundreds of hours into one cohesive, identity-forming memory. Category 2 is skill transmission, and this is where most grandparents completely miss the opportunity. Your grandchildren don't need you to entertain them. They need you to teach them things their parents don't have time or knowledge to teach. This taps into something profound in human psychology, the apprenticeship model that humans used for thousands of years before modern education. When you teach a grandchild a skill, you're not just transferring information. You're creating what psychologists call episodic memories that are tied to semantic learning. Episodic memories are memories of experiences. Semantic memories are memories of facts and skills. When you combine both, you create the strongest possible memory formation. The child remembers both the feeling of learning with you and the skill itself, and these become inseparable. I taught my granddaughter Emma to sew when she was 8, not occasionally. Every single visit, we had a sewing project. We started with threading needles and moved to making pillows, then stuffed animals, then clothing. Now she's 15, and she's designing her own clothes. But what makes me emotional is that she tells people, "My grandfather taught me to sew." That identity statement is permanent. I'm not just a memory, I'm part of who she is. The neuroscience here involves something called procedural memory, which is stored in the basal ganglia and cerebellum, different from the hippocampus where episodic memories live. Procedural memories are incredibly durable. They last lifetimes. When you tie emotional bonding to procedural learning, you're creating a memory that will literally last your grandchild's entire life. They might forget the trip to the zoo, but they'll never forget that you taught them to ride a bike, play chess, cook a specific recipe, or identify bird songs. Category 3 is story anchoring. This is something I developed after researching oral traditions in cultures around the world. For most of human history, grandparents were the primary transmitters of cultural knowledge through storytelling. Your brain is literally designed for this role. When you tell your grandchild stories, especially repeated stories about your life, their parents' childhood, or family history, you're doing something neurologically complex. You're activating mirror neurons in their brain that allow them to experience your memories as if they were their own. A study from Emory University found that children who knew their family stories had higher self-esteem and better stress management skills. But more importantly for our purpose, they reported feeling closer to grandparents even when geographical distance was significant. Here's the technique that makes story anchoring powerful. You need anchor stories that you tell repeatedly with small variations. Not the same exact story word for word, but the same core narrative with details that you add or emphasize differently. This might seem counterintuitive, but children love hearing the same stories multiple times. Each telling reinforces the neural pathway and adds layers. I have a story I call The Great Snowstorm of 1977, about when I was a young father and got snowed in with my children for a week. I've told this story to my grandchildren dozens of times. Each time, I emphasize different parts. Sometimes it's about the problem-solving we did. Sometimes it's about the funny moments. Sometimes it's about the fear I felt as a young parent. My grandchildren never get tired of this story, and now they've started telling it to each other. I've become part of their mythology. The reason this works involves the default mode network in the brain, which activates during rest and mind wandering. When children hear stories repeatedly, these stories become part of their default mode processing. They think about these stories when they're alone, when they're falling asleep, when they're daydreaming. Your stories become their thoughts, and you become part of their inner world. Category 4 is what I call undivided attention sessions, and this is probably the hardest for modern grandparents because it requires something incredibly scarce: focused presence without devices. The research here is unambiguous and sobering. A study from UCLA found that children could identify when adults were distracted versus fully present, and they formed stronger attachments to adults who gave them undivided attention even for brief periods versus partial attention for extended time. Your brain has something called the anterior cingulate cortex that processes social attention. When someone gives you full attention, specific neural networks activate that trigger bonding hormones. When someone is partially attentive, looking at their phone or distracted by television, these networks actually deactivate, and the interaction becomes neurologically null. You could spend 4 hours in the same room with your grandchild while scrolling social media and create less bonding than 15 minutes of undivided attention. Here's my protocol, and it's non-negotiable when my grandchildren visit. Every single visit includes at least one 30-minute period where my phone is in another room. Television is off, and I am completely present for whatever they want to do. It doesn't matter what the activity is. Sometimes we talk, sometimes we play a game, sometimes we just sit together while they draw. What matters is the full presence. I learned this the hard way with my grandson Tyler. I was babysitting him one afternoon, and I was distracted by emails I needed to send. He kept trying to show me a Lego creation, and I kept saying, "That's great, buddy," without really looking. Finally, he said something that devastated me. "Papa, you're here, but you're not really here." He was 6 years old, and he could already identify my divided attention. That was my wake-up call. The biological mechanism involves oxytocin again, but also a neurotransmitter called dopamine. When a child has your full attention, their brain releases both chemicals, creating a powerful reward sensation that becomes associated with you. When you're distracted, neither chemical releases at meaningful levels. You're physically present, but neurologically absent from their memory formation. Category 5 is legacy projects, and this is the most sophisticated category. These are longer-term activities that create something permanent that outlasts individual visits. This could be a garden you plant together, a scrapbook you build over time, a series of letters you write to them, a collection of something you curate together, or a skill-based project that spans months or years. The power of legacy projects lies in something called prospective memory and anticipatory excitement. When your grandchild knows that there's an ongoing project you're working on together, their brain actually thinks about you between visits. They anticipate the next session. This anticipation strengthens neural pathways associated with you even when you're not physically present. I started what I call the recipe legacy with my granddaughter Lily when she was 9. We're working through my late wife's handwritten recipe book, making one recipe together each month. We've done this for 3 years now. Each recipe has a story attached. We photograph the results. We write notes in the margins about our experiences. When we finish the entire book, probably when she's a teenager, we'll have created something irreplaceable that contains memories of dozens of experiences consolidated into one meaningful artifact. Research from the University of Virginia found that legacy projects created between grandparents and grandchildren led to significantly stronger relationships compared to equivalent time spent in entertainment activities. The key factor was the sense of building something together, which created what psychologists call shared agency, the feeling that you're both contributing to something larger than individual moments. Now let me tell you the mistakes that will sabotage everything I just taught you, because knowing what to do is useless if you're simultaneously doing things that undermine your efforts. Mistake 1 is inconsistency. If you establish a ritual or legacy project and then fail to maintain it, you actually create disappointment that damages bonding. Children's brains thrive on predictability. When you promise Tool Tuesday or monthly baking and then cancel repeatedly, you're not just missing opportunities, you're creating negative associations. The disappointment they feel releases cortisol, which, as I mentioned earlier, interferes with memory formation and bonding. Mistake 2 is competing with parents. Some grandparents try to be the fun alternative to parents who have to enforce rules and discipline. This creates terrible dynamics and actually weakens your relationship long-term. Children need you to be an extension of their parents' values, not an alternative. When you undermine parental authority by being permissive, you create confusion and anxiety that interferes with secure attachment. Mistake 3 is age-inappropriate activities. You need to match activities to your grandchild's developmental stage, not to your desires or memories of what you did with your own children. A 4-year-old cannot appreciate a 3-hour museum visit. A teenager probably doesn't want to do the same craft projects they loved at 7. You need to adapt constantly, and this requires you to observe and listen rather than impose. Mistake 4 is bringing your own emotional baggage or family drama into time with grandchildren. I've counseled grandparents who complained about the other grandparent, criticized their own adult children in front of grandkids, or used grandchildren as emotional support for their own problems. This is devastating. Children's brains are not equipped to handle adult emotional complexity. When you burden them with your issues, you activate their stress response and damage their sense of security with you. Mistake 5 is using gifts as substitutes for presents. Some grandparents genuinely believe that expensive presents demonstrate love. But children's brains don't process material objects the way adults do. A toy creates brief dopamine excitement that fades within days or hours. The neural impact is negligible long-term. Worse, if you establish a pattern where every visit involves gifts, children begin to associate you with material expectations rather than emotional connection. Let me give you specific, actionable protocols you can implement immediately. I want you to choose one activity from each category and commit to it for 6 months. Not 5 categories simultaneously. That's overwhelming. But one ritual, one skill you'll teach, one story you'll tell repeatedly, one undivided attention protocol, and one legacy project. For ritual building, here's a simple starter. Establish a greeting ritual that happens every single time you see your grandchild. It could be a special handshake, a specific question you ask, a song you sing together, or a physical routine like a specific kind of hug. Practice this until it becomes automatic. This alone will strengthen your bond measurably. For skill transmission, think about what you know that's becoming rare. Can you teach them to write in cursive, use a compass, identify constellations, cook something from scratch, build something with wood? The specific skill matters less than your commitment to progressive teaching over time. Start simple and build complexity gradually. For story anchoring, write down 3 stories from your life that have good narrative structure, a beginning, middle, and end, and that contain either humor, challenge overcome, or emotional revelation. Practice telling these stories out loud until you can deliver them smoothly. Then tell them to your grandchildren repeatedly, adding details each time. For undivided attention, commit to phone-free time every visit. Put your phone in a drawer. Set a timer for 30 minutes. Tell your grandchild that this is their special time and they can choose any activity. Then follow their lead completely. If they want to talk, talk. If they want silence, sit in silence. If they want to show you something, watch with complete focus. For legacy projects, think about something you can create together that will take months or years. Start a photo album where you each contribute pictures and captions. Plant a tree and track its growth. Build a collection of something interesting. Write letters to them that they'll open at different ages. The project should require regular contribution from both of you. Here's the protocol for implementation. Start with just one category this month. Master it before adding another. This is critical because consistency in one area is vastly more powerful than inconsistent attempts at all five. Once that first category feels natural and established, add the second. I want to talk about the reality of long-distance grandparenting because many of you live far from your grandchildren. Everything I've taught you still applies, but it requires adaptation. You can maintain rituals through video calls at scheduled times. You can teach skills through mailed project kits that you work on simultaneously over video. You can record yourself telling stories and send these recordings for bedtime. You can work on legacy projects through the mail, trading contributions back and forth. A study from Michigan State University found that quality of interaction mattered significantly more than frequency or proximity for long-term grandparent-grandchild bonding. Grandparents who lived far away but maintained consistent, meaningful contact through scheduled video calls and letters created stronger bonds than local grandparents who saw grandchildren frequently but without intentional interaction. One of my granddaughters lives 800 miles away. We have Sunday morning video calls every single week, no exceptions. We drink hot chocolate together over video. We play games using online platforms. I mail her books with my notes in the margins. We work on a shared digital scrapbook. She feels as close to me as my local grandchildren despite seeing me in person only 3 times per year. Let me address a question I hear constantly. What if you didn't have a good relationship with your own grandparents and feel like you don't have a model for this role? This is actually more common than people realize, and it's not a disadvantage. You can deliberately create the relationship you wish you'd had. The research I'm sharing with you is your roadmap. You don't need to replicate tradition. You need to create new tradition based on science and love. I worked with a grandfather who grew up without knowing his grandparents. He felt completely lost about how to connect with his grandson. We started with the simplest ritual. Every Saturday morning, they had breakfast together at the same diner and ordered the same meals. That's it. From that single ritual, their relationship deepened over 2 years into something profound. The grandfather later told me it healed something in his own childhood while building something beautiful for his grandson. What holds most grandparents back isn't lack of love or desire. It's fear of inadequacy and uncertainty about what really matters. You worry about being boring. You worry about not being enough. You compare yourself to other grandparents or to some ideal you've constructed. Stop. Your grandchildren don't need you to be perfect or exciting. They need you to be consistent and present. The most powerful thing I learned in 40 years of practice is that children don't remember perfect. They remember authentic. They remember presence. They remember the feeling of being fully seen and accepted. You don't need to compete with screens or entertainment or other people. You just need to show up consistently and engage with intention. Before we finish, I want to talk about the grandparents watching this who have damaged relationships with adult children that affect grandchild access. This is painful and complex, and I've counseled many families through this. The path forward requires humility and often professional mediation. But even with limited access, the principles I've shared apply. Make every moment count. Build rituals around whatever access you have. Focus on presence over performance, and commit to being someone your grandchild can depend on. Some of you are dealing with custody battles, estrangement, or complicated family dynamics. I can't resolve those situations in this video, but I can tell you this. Children remember who was consistent, who was calm, and who made them feel safe. Even in difficult circumstances, you can be that person when you do have access. That foundation might be what repairs relationships as your grandchildren grow older and gain autonomy. Let me give you one final piece of research that might motivate you. A longitudinal study from Boston University tracked grandparent-grandchild relationships over 30 years. They found that close relationships with grandparents correlated with better mental health outcomes, higher educational achievement, and stronger family values in adulthood. But here's what's remarkable. These benefits appeared even when the grandparents had died before the grandchildren reached adulthood. The memories alone provided protective psychological benefits decades later. What you're building isn't just relationship. You're creating psychological infrastructure that will support your grandchildren throughout their entire lives. You're giving them an inner voice of wisdom and love that will guide them through challenges you'll never witness. You're creating a template for how they'll grandparent their own children someday. Think about your own grandparents if you had them. What do you remember? Probably not the gifts or the big events. You remember how they made you feel. You remember their quirks, their lessons, Their consistent presence or their absence. You're creating those same memories right now, whether intentionally or not. The question is whether you're creating the memories you want to create. Start today. Don't wait for the perfect moment or the perfect plan. Choose one ritual. Schedule one undivided attention session. Start one story. The beautiful thing about memory formation is that it's never too late to start building neural pathways. Even if your grandchildren are teenagers, these principles work. Even if you feel like you've wasted years, you can begin today. What's one ritual you had with your grandparents that you still remember clearly? Share it in the comments. And if you didn't have that experience, tell me what you wish you'd had. Let's learn from each other and build a community of grandparents who are doing this intentionally. Your grandchildren are growing up, whether you take action or not. Time doesn't pause, but memory formation responds to your choices. You have more power than you think to create something lasting and beautiful. You don't need money. You don't need elaborate plans. You need consistency, presence, and love translated into deliberate action. I've given you the framework. Now it's your turn to implement it. 6 months from now, if you commit to these principles, your relationship with your grandchildren will be measurably different. They'll light up when they see you. They'll talk about you when you're not there. They'll carry you in their hearts as they grow into adults. And that's worth every ounce of effort you invest. Click on the cards on your screen to see more videos like this.